Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson here on Wednesday. It's been a busy week since spring football has started. Nebraska has 5 practices done already. They had a big visit weekend. We're going to dive into all of that. We're not going to waste any time with banter or discuss a basketball team up in Omaha that isn't playing anymore. We're not going to do any of that. We're just going to go right into football. PC enjoyed that a little bit. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. He laughed. I got a laugh out of him. Bruntz, I never get a laugh out of. So that's what we got here. All right. Practice. What did you guys see? Bruntz, biggest takeaway from yesterday?
Well, there's more position changes. So AJ Rollins is now working both at tight end and defensive line, edge, whatever they're going to call it. Jaleel Martin's moved to wide receiver, also working a little defensive back. That's a gray jersey, so update your jersey color flip card at home. But
there's 4 of them now, right?
Let's see. There's yellow, green, red, white, and now gray. So we're at 5.
Where did red, white come from?
They're the guys who are active.
Oh, my bad. Yeah, I was thinking the
no. Yeah. So have we had purple yet? Is there a purple jersey?
I feel like there's a blue one that you'd see every now and then.
Yeah.
But those are like the scout team ones, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that was the blue that Kenny Bell wore under his regular jersey for years.
I never heard about that.
The first time I'm hearing about that. So yeah, AJ Rollins' move, the more I've kind of thought about it, I'm mildly intrigued. I'm mildly intrigued. That was my takeaway, was that I think there's more talent at the tight end spot than maybe what we gave credit for coming into the spring, especially now that they've moved Jake Applegate over there. They got Janarian Bonner. And AJ Rollins has apparently been doing quite well at defensive line and rush end edge, whatever you're going to call it. And I'm that's something I'm watching now. I'm mildly intrigued.
Is this BC, is this a freedom Akamaladin moment for AJ Rollins? New coach, new position, new avenue to success?
I think he has potential at either spot still. And he was one of those guys I felt like was just maybe on the fringe at tight end last year. But I don't blame them for exploring the possibility, because I didn't get to see him as much as you guys probably did when he was at Omaha Creighton Prep. But I thought he could be a pretty stout defender at the next level. I didn't know that I preferred one position over the other, but it sounds like so far he's led the team in sacks. When he's got his reps, we're only 5 in, and so take that for what it is. But he looks good alongside those guys. They have some guys that are young that just really look good to me, that I don't know if they'll be ready this fall or not, but like, I know we've talked about Cameron Lenhart. He jumps out to me. Princewell looks good too when you're standing 10 feet from him and you're like, okay, I understand why he's such a highly rated guy. So while I'm a little, I don't know if nervous is the term in March, because I'm not like losing sleep. Yeah, I'm not losing sleep about the defensive line situation, I promise you. But I do wonder a little bit about their depth. But then there's that part of me that's incredibly excited for like the next couple of years at that position. When you think about the recruits that are coming in, and if AJ Rollins can be a part of that, and give you something, I mean, that thing can look pretty good within the next couple of years. They have some guys that at least you're like, I want to watch that.
Had to think about it for a second, but if I go all the way back to the beginning of AJ Rollins' recruitment, it actually started at a Nebraska team camp with Creighton Prep there, and Barrett Ruud offered him because they loved what he was doing as a defensive end. He wanted to play tight end, so I think that's kind of how things ended up where it did. I don't think that he envisioned that he'd be able to get big enough to be a defensive end at the college level. And so I think he was more intrigued by tight end. So I think that's why things kind of lined up the way that they did. But it does seem like he has always kind of stood out for some coaches based on his ability to play on the defensive side of the ball. So that one of the position changes, that one definitely caught my eye, but I can certainly see why. And then, we've seen it before with Nebraska. I think Terrence Knighton will be a different style than Hank Hughes, but they were able to get some good play out of Freedom for several years, who then got a cup of coffee in the NFL. So I would say that worked out really well for him. But when Bruntz and I first saw Freedom, he was a tight end down in Grandview, I think, high school in Missouri. Is that right, Bruntz?
Yeah, he was he was catching passes wearing an Angry Birds t-shirt from what I can remember.
I was just thinking he's part of our screen graphic t-shirts collection.
Yeah.
That I was disappointed Caleb Pyfram was wearing just a standard Omaha Central jacket the other day. I almost went up to him and asked if he had any new screen printed shirts. We need those back. All right. What else from practice? BC, what was your big takeaway?
It's not like we've seen him throw the ball down the field much, the QBs, but I guess the visual right in front of all the media as they're lined up on the sideline of Casey Thompson, like closest to the sideline, going through all the footwork drills right next to Jeff Sims. And even though Casey had the yellow jersey on, you could see him, he did some short throws and stuff like that. He's not cleared to go all the way. But I thought that visual was important of like kind of resetting, because I do think that the narrative sort of took off like, well, it's Jeff Sims. Like, yeah, there's kind of been this, I feel like there's been this thought like Jeff Sims is their guy. And I don't know if we should go all the way with that right now. I think you got to remind yourself, Casey has been through some QB battles many times before. He's still here. He's still very engaged. And I thought all the cameras clicking and catching video of him working there is good for the public conversation, I guess, if that makes sense. To just like, because sometimes we're in that time of year where we're trying to fill space, and it's like, well, who's going to be who do you think it's going to be? And you'll say like, oh, Jeff Sims, maybe 55-45 Sims. Nobody knows. I mean, let's see if Casey can bounce back. And he's getting all the education of the offense, just like Jeff Sims is. And it sounds like he's being a good teacher behind the scenes to younger QBs. I just remain intrigued by Casey, and I don't want to just set him off to the side, even though Jeff Sims is a very appealing prospect and was good in front of the media too.
Yeah, you mentioned there right at the end, but he spoke for the first time to the Nebraska media on Tuesday. I mean, I don't know which one of you guys was standing over there, but how did that go?
Yeah, he was very straightforward about his adjustment to the cold. That's something that he is currently adjusting to. Went with sleeves.
Florida boys. Went
with sleeves the first day, and then had to decided to back it off to no sleeves the rest of the way, and seems to be doing better. I seem to remember some like Gator Bowls that we covered that were sneaky cold from what I can remember. Like even the Georgia-Nebraska game that year, like it rained. It was still pretty chilly. Like it wasn't like, wind chill stuff, but it was uncomfortable. But, I think he's a guy that, and he said this, I mean, he's kind of been through it. And, this is his second stop. He's been in college football for 4 years. He's a veteran. He knows how to, learn an offense and study and all that other stuff. I think the fact that Matt Rule and Jeff Collins had their connection, I think, was somewhat appealing to him in why he ended up at Nebraska. And, I thought his answer, he was asked straight up, like, how do you as the outside guy coming in as in a quarterback competition kind of function? And especially when that guy that you're competing against or perceived to be competing against is out. And he basically said, I'm working on myself. Like that's all you can do. So, being around him for the first time, I mean, he's every bit of 6'4". I think if we list him at 220, I mean, he looks like a
bigger than that, right?
Big physical quarterback.
Yeah.
So, there's that when you start thinking about, okay, how much is Nebraska going to run the ball at the quarterback, that kind of thing. But I thought he handled himself well. I mean, the Nebraska media contingent that first time, I think, can kind of catch people by surprise. But I thought he handled himself pretty well. I mean, he seemed to me like a veteran quarterback, which I guess is probably a good thing.
So have you guys thought about how odd Nebraska's quarterback room is? Like every individual story, save for maybe Richard Torres, is kind of its own like weird backstory thing. You have Casey Thompson, who's been, as Brian put it, in multiple quarterback battles in the past at Texas. And then he was Nebraska's quarterback last season, except when he was injured. You have Jeff Sims, who by all accounts is a recruiting darling. Like the analysts loved what he looks like, how he throws, all of that, during his recruitment. And then he had kind of a rough career at Georgia Tech, and now he's here at Nebraska. You have Chubba Purdy, who had a really tough time last November when thrust into playing time. You have Logan Smothers, who sort of just hung around despite everyone kind of assuming he would be the next one in the transfer portal. He's got a career start and has played as a backup to Chubba Purdy several times. And then you have Heinrich Haarberg, who everyone's ready to pencil in for another position. And Nebraska's dropping a video of him scoring on a touchdown on Saturday on what looked like a triple option play. And then you have Richard Torres. And, of course, there's other guys beyond that. But Nebraska's like quarterback room doesn't lack for narratives or storylines on its own. And they have this giant collection of them as a new coaching staff tries to figure out, not just for this upcoming season, but if it is Jeff Sims, you'd theoretically have multiple years. You'd have multiple years with Purdy. You'd have multiple years of Haarberg and Smothers. Like, it's just kind of a weird car crash of a room. And when you step back and you think about it, I don't know that we've ever covered a quarterback room, or I certainly haven't covered a Nebraska quarterback room quite like this one.
I think the only thing that could get close to it was that first spring. You guys know about Patrick Spring, because you had.
But none of those guys had played. That's
I know.
The difference.
Well, I think that was kind of they each had their own kind of backstories, and they were all really, really highly touted recruits. And
because it's Martinez, O'Brien, Jebbia. Is there anybody else? Is there a fourth in there?
There was one other guy in there.
Andrew Bunch.
Andrew Bunch.
There yet?
Bunchy was there, I think. Yeah. So I mean, that was a true competition. This one's just how do we find enough reps for these guys who are all
you have 4 guys that have started Power 5 games.
I mean, they're veterans, and it's a chocked full. I remember when Scott Frost used to say and Mario Verduzco used to say that they wanted to have 5 guys in the room. And you're like, how the heck are you ever going to do that? And then you turn around and look at this season, and it's you're probably having to move tables and stuff out of the meeting room just to fit everybody.
Yeah, of the guys that we're talking about, Haarberg so far this spring's probably been the most interesting to me. Just that you mentioned the clip they showed, and it doesn't feel like anything's done unintentionally over there.
I'm glad you think the same thing.
And just the fact that he was brought up in front of the media, and he is, as you say, willing to switch positions. But I'm intrigued about Haarberg to QB right now. I mean, everybody else we've at least seen, we've got a taste of sort of in game action for the most part, aside from Richard Torres. But Haarberg's that guy who we knew when he was a prospect recruited that he was a raw guy that was going to take a little time. And you'll remember that first spring game he had, his arm strength kind of wowed people. He was against the wind, I think, and he led that one drive to win. I know it's a scrimmage, but they cared. And he got it done and made some big throws. And he's got great speed. He does for the position he plays. I mean, he's not gonna take a backseat to anybody. And I know that they care a lot about that GPS stuff. You hear Rule bring it up a lot, and they really use that to form evaluations on some guys. And
explain that for the listeners.
Well, there's just some guys who maybe I know that they've seen, and they might not at off the cuff look as fast to the eye, but then they're going back and they're like, man, he's got good, his GPS stuff ranked. I'm just saying they factor it in. They're using all their technology to sort of form evaluations. It's very metric based staff. It feels like we see that in how they recruit when they look at all the track times of these guys. And so it would be no different in how they're evaluating their players here, and sort of what are the measurables that are proven data about these guys that we can use to make educated decisions. And obviously what you do in the scrimmage kind of takes precedence over it all, or, takes that's what decides things. But Haarberg, was not a guy 2 weeks ago I thought we'd have spent as much space or time talking about or, doing interviews with. And credit to him that he's fighting the fight. And I think this staff's very intrigued by him in some way or another.
Moving on from quarterbacks, anything else you guys want to get into before we go into a big visit weekend, which will also feature some quarterback talk?
This can kind of. Oh, go ahead, Bruntz.
No, go ahead. I'll follow up with whatever you got.
So polite.
This would maybe connect to the recruiting stuff. I thought it was interesting. Bruntz saw this. Rules during the practice. He's the type of guy who will come over, and he talked to a couple of us media guys, and he's just having a conversation about, just general stuff for about 10 minutes. But the way he can kind of do that and go into interacting about just like whatever topic under the sun with a couple of guys on the sideline, a couple pencil neck guys, and then suddenly turn the switch and go into coach mode. And he holds his coaches as accountable as he does the players during the practice. That's something we've seen. And he said as much after the practice. He said, I'm sure you guys saw that. But I was thinking, as we had that experience with him yesterday where he came over and talked to some media and then he just popped right into coach mode, how effective he can be on all these visits during practices, where he can go. He has an ability, I think, to communicate in just a normal level with this conversation with a parent and a recruit over here. And then, okay, coach mode, and you see his passion and intensity for that part too. And I think that could be very effective. And probably was on Saturday. And it from our reviews that we'll get into from recruits, it sounds like that happened.
One other thing that popped yesterday it was kind of like a quick aside that Rule was talking about. But as you kind of are thinking about the defense and what this is going to look like and how it's going to work and where guys are going to fit and all this other stuff, it was noteworthy to me that Matt Rule said that they want to be able to play like 20 guys a game on defense. And that stood out to me, and he kind of like verbally highlighted it. And I'm going to kind of view, I think, the way that competition unfolds this spring through that lens of like, yes, you're looking for your best 11. They're going to mix and match in a 3-3-5. There's going to be some personnel coming in and out, but they want to get a lot of guys into the games and not just have a situation where, the same 3 or 4 defensive linemen are having to play all the snaps. So that was noteworthy, I think, from yesterday's session. It probably didn't, rise to the level of a headline or something like that, but that's the kind of depth that they're looking for on defense as they go through the spring. And they're not to the point where they're putting together a depth chart. It's a lot of teaching, but there's going to be opportunities for guys that we kind of like Heinrich Harburg's on defense in some ways, where the guys that maybe aren't front of mind right now, but at some point in the season, they're going to be called upon to come in and give important snaps in conference games and tight situations. So keep that in mind, I think, as the spring goes along and we're talking about, guys who are emerging and maybe new positions, things like that.
That was good. That was a good point, because it was at the very end of his time with the media when he said that, and it did get, I think, lost a little bit, but it was pretty interesting. And I think of like a John Bullock, who we've already heard of. I just think there's going to be these names that sort of pop up. And if you remember Thomas Fedone, when he was up in front of the media, he said there's some guys who they sense it's like the real chance now, like that guys who have maybe been slept on in this program for a couple of years. And you can tell that they think it can happen for them with this staff, and this staff's really paying attention to them. And so going with what Bruntz said, I do think we're going to see a few more surprises than we normally have seen, of just guys who, maybe they're walk-on types or whatever. But, and he actually said, I'm sure there's walk-ons sitting in that locker room right now who are basically wondering, what the heck, where the heck am I? Am I lost in this whole thing? There's 100 some guys over here, but they're going to matter at some point, and we just got to keep them thinking about that.
All right, let's take a quick time out. When we come back, we're going to dive into the big recruiting weekend. We'll run through what we know, what was set up, what could happen for Nebraska going forward, and we'll even talk about a guy named Dylan Raiola, if you care to listen to it. Recruiting, big weekend for Nebraska. Had a bunch of visitors in. Not everybody made it in, which is what we expect. I mean, when you go through these sorts of things, you just know that the visit list is never going to quite line up with what you have for confirmed visitors. And that was the case for Nebraska as well. But they had, I would say, guys, 85-90% of the people we expected to be in were there. Plus, they had some other additions as well that Bruntz will speak on from Utah. But we'll just start right away with kind of this recruiting weekend. And we were all making phone calls. We were all catching up with different people. Any immediate takeaway for you, Brian Christopherson, from the recruiting weekend? Nebraska did not get a commitment. I should put that out there. But any immediate takeaway that you have based off of this Junior Day weekend?
I'll just be quick and reiterate what you said really well last week. Is it was a table setting weekend, and people just have to keep that in mind. And they feel like they did that very effectively. And I mean, that's really what it was. And now the idea is hopefully these guys come back for officials. But you did have your, Wingo and Raiola on location, thinking about, they talk all the time. Wingo said about teaming up together. And, here it is in Nebraska, and you see the building going up, and you see a coaching staff that's passionate. It's been in the NFL, and that can't hurt. So they got done. They set the foundation, I guess, for what they hope will get. Maybe 3 or 4 of those guys pop at a later time, but you had to do this first step to get there.
Bruntz?
Yeah, it was interesting because a lot of these guys went to the baseball game on Friday, and they didn't come at the same time. So like I was on the concourse, doing baseball stuff, and like there's this mass of people that kind of start moving towards the left field foul line. And it's Dylan Raiola, and then like a couple minutes later, like Ryan Wingo walks by. Just like I think Roger Gradney kind of came in too. It was just fun because it was like a Royal Rumble almost. Like it was like every 3 minutes there was like a new recruit that was like showing up and coming and hanging out. And I don't know. I thought it set kind of a good tone for the weekend. I mean, it didn't feel like, my sense wasn't that it was this huge, like, the staff wasn't making it this huge blown out weekend, but just kind of like a, hey, come hang out, watch some practice. And like you said, just kind of starting that relationship, or at least that next step in getting them on campus that you'd kind of talked about. So, I think they did a good job of bringing in some pretty big names. I can't think of a weekend like that at any point that I've been covering recruiting. So I think, for the most part, it was pretty good. I mean, I think they're going to get some commitments out of this weekend. But, it probably is going to be a little bit further down the road.
Yeah, you hit on something that talking with different recruits and other people that were over there on Saturday, the word understated got used a couple times to kind of describe it. Like I sort of wondered if it was going to be almost a festival type atmosphere where you're really trying to whip people into a frenzy. And it wasn't that at all. I mean, it was very low key. It was just kind of like you said, come hang out, watch us practice, come see what we've got going on, spend some time around some guys that from 7-on-7 or from your area or whatever, and just have a good time. It was really interesting because I think, when we think of the big sort of previous visit things with Nebraska, it has all this kind of pomp and circumstance with the Friday night lights and all of that, or you have, the big visit weekend games where there's this massive game that's also being played in addition to it. This was just kind of a like, just come chill in Lincoln. And I think it hit with a lot of people in a way that I don't know that I was expecting. A couple of those guys, Nate Frazier, Gatlin Bear, just like could not stop raving about just the people. And I do think that the most successful recruiting operations is not necessarily the glitz and glamour. It's being able to sell like, hey, we can get you to where you want to go. And when you're here, you're going to have a great time. And that's really what those guys were sort of saying coming out of it. And to the point of this being a table setter, I mean, I think of the people I talked with, outside of maybe one recruit, everybody else was talking about how this was lining up for, they're planning on getting back, and they're already kind of discussing, like, it broke into smaller groups where you have, Gage Ginther talking about how he wants to spend more time with guys like Ian Flint or Gibson Pyle, or he'd love to be back at the same time as Raiola if it works out, if they wanted to take visits at the same time again. So it just sort of created this opportunity where these guys build future relationships with people that may or may not be their teammates, but it also reinforced, like, hey, if you're going to come back for a visit, maybe I try to come back that same weekend. And I think that can be really valuable, as they try to put this class together. Obviously, you would have loved to have commitments coming out of it. I don't think I'm breaking any news when I say that they're eventually going to get those. I think there's several guys that are ready to commit to Nebraska that just have to go see a couple other schools or just want to, finish off their recruitment to the fullest before they lock in. But I feel pretty confident that there's, 3 to 5 guys alone out of this weekend that we're going to draw back to, and quite possibly more that are going to end up being Nebraska commits, where it just had a large effect on their whole recruiting. So I thought it was a successful weekend, even as they come away without a commitment. But a lot of that has to do with the excitement level of most of these guys I was talking to was really, really high. I mean, they wanted to get on the phone. They wanted to talk about Nebraska. It wasn't like a, 3-word answer and then I'm stammering the next question. Like, there's some long quotes in there, and there's a lot of excitement, and it came from a place where it wasn't, forced. It seemed pretty genuine to me.
Yeah. I also think sometimes you see all the offers that go out and you can think of, like, man, they're casting a net for like hundreds of guys here. I believe they have a more specific focus right now. And I don't know exactly what the cutoff number is, but the board is, I think, it's a smaller number of guys where it's like, let's see what can happen over the next couple months. And I think you put a good number on it, Schaefer. Like, if 5 of those guys popped, like about 5 of them, you'd take it and then you kind of reset. And I don't think they mind going into the senior year with some guys and seeing, they had some success with that, with guys who sort of flashed their final year. And that's sort of an old school way of recruiting. But I think you blend those two things together, like with the big hauls you can get maybe from the summer, from the stuff like that happened this weekend. And then you merge that with what they did. It seemed like effectively in the last class, because they had to, where you're taking that senior film and you're making late evaluations on guys. And you've heard Rule talk about how he likes that old school recruiting part too, where you don't sleep on those guys who are finishing out high school and growing later in the process. So we got to remember that it all works together.
Yeah, no, I think your point is correct. I mean, it seems like with the staff, you're going to get a very clear delineation of, like, we're going to have our top guys that we're going to pursue the heck out of through the spring, through the early summer. And then, I mean, they want to do those late evals. And I think there is a nice mix that you can find of, we're going to go after guys that are, early contributors, the really, elbows out recruitment guys that you got to fight off other teams to get. And then you're going to have the Jeremiah Charleses and the Ismail Smith Flores and those guys that, just pop later on. And I think that's the recipe. I mean, I think, though, that they're in the 24 class, it feels like they're just still a little bit playing from behind in terms of time and the relationships they've been able to build. But, when you see a weekend like they just had, I don't think they're maybe as far behind as what I thought they were, at this point in the calendar. So, we'll see how many of those guys come back for official visits. But I mean, based on what we heard from guys this weekend, Nebraska's right there in that competition for the official visits when they start in June, or May and June. So that's another month here.
All right, we made it 30 minutes. I only mentioned his name once. Let's have the Dylan Raiola conversation. Obviously, he was back out here again. Bruntz saw him at the baseball game. He was involved with seemingly every recruit that came through. And he, by all accounts, had a great time. And on the other side of that, we currently preside over a message board where there's some real Dylan Raiola fatigue. What do you make of that, BC?
I mean, it's just that point where it's the helicopter circling, much like my answers, on anything, or you just gotta you're waiting for it to land at this point. And so there's only so many ways you can sort of move the story forward until the decision. There honestly is. Like, I mean, I know it's like, oh, he has an official visit here, and he's maybe going to this spring game or that spring game, but honest to goodness, he's seen all these places quite a few times now, probably more than most recruits see, campuses before they decide. And so I do think while that stuff is important, I also think there's a segment of it's nothing against the Raiolas at all. It's just that when you're constantly in the headlines, there is that point where people are like, okay, what's the next part of this story? And that's sort of where we are now, I feel like, and that's nobody's fault. It's just the way it is.
And from Nebraska's point of view too, like I don't know what you do differently at this point. Like you've gotten him back for multiple unofficial visits. You've sent the whole staff down there. I'm guessing that there's going to be a similar show of force once coaches are able to go out on the road in the spring. But yeah, I mean, the only thing that's kind of left right now is, is he going to take official visits before he decides? That there's just not a whole lot of new, I guess, on the horizon right now, unless, you get like a top 3 list or something like that, which, I mean, I think you could feel pretty comfortable naming what those 3 are, but yeah.
Are you discounting Oregon and their late push here?
I don't know. It feels like they're a little behind. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just my read on it. So I think I get the fatigue, but at the same time, when you're pursuing the number 1 player overall in the class, the number 1 quarterback, this is kind of how it works. I mean, it's a little bit similar kind of to Arch Manning, with his recruitment. And
yeah, I mean, that's the easy comparison.
That went into the summer. He took a lot of unofficial visits, so it's not unprecedented here.
We're not as used to it around here too. I mean, with guys of like that are in that top, you got him, and you got the number 3 guy, and Williams and Nari, and then Wingo at 6, all here. I mean, we just haven't seen that type of recruit where it gets the day-to-day attention like this one.
Yeah, and it's not gonna stop anytime soon. I mean, that's the thing. And this is what people claim that they wanted, right? Like, you want to be in on the top players in the country.
Yep.
You'd rather be in the conversation and have the fatigue of it than never having your name mentioned, right? So I just continue to go back to Nebraska just has to continue to find reasons to get him out here if he wants to come out here. Make sure that relationship stays strong. It seems like he's fairly well connected to Marcus Satterfield and Matt Rule at this point. Omar Hales, who, by the way, I put this on the message board. Is Omar Hales the single most popular person on Nebraska's recruiting operation? I mean, that guy is in photos with like everybody. You just random tweets. His name will just get dropped at any time. I mean, he's probably off playing Madden against somebody at any point during the day. Omar Hales, very, very popular member of Nebraska's recruiting staff, it seems.
Yeah, well, and even going back to before they even had the full staff, I mean, he was responsible for landing a few of the guys in this class. I mean, Kai Wallen is one guy that I know Omar Hale's visit to Sacramento was a big reason why Nebraska was able to get back on his radar. I mean, I think I think Hales is an extremely valuable piece of kind of making this all work.
Yeah. So there's just a lot, obviously, kind of came out of this weekend, and we're certainly going to track all of that going forward. They're going to have another big visit operation with April 22nd. I mean, I would expect quite a few people in town for that. Raiola scheduled to come back. We'll see if that happens. I have no reason to believe that it won't, but we will see if he's back out here for another visit there. I think that basically covers it from recruiting in terms of what we saw this weekend. Like I said, I think there's going to be some more commitments coming. One thing that hasn't really been mentioned much on our board or otherwise, Nebraska's getting some of their 2023 commits showing up at practices and stopping by. Riley Van Poppel has been in town the last couple of days. Malachi Coleman, I think it's been a fixture at Nebraska's practices when they've been there. So, it's good. You kind of, especially in the role that I'm in, you move to the next class, you kind of forget about these other guys. There's a whole crop of guys that are going to be coming in at the beginning of June that are only going to add to the sort of newness that we see around this football program right now, where everything feels just a little bit different. Only a handful of them came in for January, and a lot more will be coming in June. Any final thoughts? Anything you guys want to say before we depart? We'll be back on Friday. We'll do another podcast Friday to wrap up the week. But the spring is 1/3 of the way over. 1/3 of the way done. Does it feel that way to you?
It's gone quick. I mean, it's I don't know. It feels like it's moving at an appropriate pace. I don't think it's really gone too slow or too fast.
Yeah. BC, you got any final thoughts? Anything you want to add? Anything you want to tell the people at home?
No, I don't. I have nothing to plug really. A ton of stories on the site. They should go. They should come to the site because we talked about almost every guy under the sun who was here. So they should do that.
That's a great idea.
We'll finish on this. A hearty congratulations to friend of the pod, Todd Peterson, who apparently had their second child, I guess, according to social media.
Yeah.
So 2042 recruiting class, I guess, would be when it would be. So keep an eye on that, I guess.
I'm excited the next time.
File that one away.
Yeah, I'm excited for him to send in a song that this new child really likes and for BC to read the lyrics like he did with that hot dog song. Yeah, that was a favorite of everybody. We are overdue for a mailbag podcast. So we will certainly, after spring ball, we will certainly make that happen sometime in late April, early May. So if you have certain questions that you would like, if you want to hear more sock talk, we'll see if it can happen. If BC's got anything for us, but we'll get to that. In the meantime, be sure to check out Husker247. Everything that we have been doing lately up on that site, Husker247.com. We're going to have some stuff on Texas. Talked with Garrett McGuire and Bob Wager about their experience in Texas and how it can help them as Nebraska tries to recruit that state. Certainly more coverage from the recruiting weekend, more recruits that will likely be in for the next couple practices. Practice again on Thursday. There's practices, I would believe, on Saturday as well, and then continuing into the next week. We're getting a little bit closer, and as always, everything you need, everything you want to know, Husker247.com. We'll be back later this week with some more podcast content.